Hi, Jamie.
Hey,
Here we
hi.
are again.
Happy Sunday.
Yeah, happy Sunday to you. And I've enjoyed reading your Substack this week, but I guess what I really wanted to open today's conversation about was your announcement that you've had your latest paper published in a peer-reviewed journal. What counts as evidence for Gestalt language processing? A methodological, I nearly said that right,
You
review
should, you should
of
benefit from
measurement.
speech therapy.
I know, well, I must get some. Construct validity and epistemic exclusion in autism and language research. And I think it kind of ties in quite nicely as well with particularly your Substack today in terms of, thinking about evidence. It's sort of like all kind of comes full circle, but I guess this is more thinking about um, where are we? Where is this evidence for Gestalt language processors? Um, so talk to me about it.
Well, first, a tiny correction. It's
Sorry.
not been published. It's been accepted.
Ah,
So I've made it past the editorial review. That you
right.
submit a paper and the editor says, right, no, I'm sorry, we're not doing this. Or the editor says, oh, that looks interesting. I'll submit
Mm,
it to our reviewers and we'll get back to you. So that's the stage that happened. So I had
okay.
two rejections of that paper. I put some stuff, on Substack notes about those rejection letters, the desk rejection, and I suspect there was a lot of AI, keyword searching and stuff of like, well, we don't actually know, and it kind of proved my point of like they don't know what they're doing. They're
Mm,
using instruments that are not designed to measure the thing that they're examining, right? So there's a
mm,
construct validity,
yeah.
it's category errors again, and so when I look, across the arc of kind of what I'm trying to do in any kind of research that you do, you kind of do everything at once. So you have to do one thing and then you have to build from it from there. And so if you
Mm,
look at kind of the arc so far, the first one, it was kind of cheeky, but it's, hi, I'm Gestalt processor, I'm here, right? And then the next one built on that. And now, so this one looks at the instruments themselves. And,
mm,
you're making assessments of people and, it's kind of the difference between imperial and metric. You're
mm,
using the wrong tool, when the
yeah.
right tool would do perfectly fine. Um, well, that's where we are right now. It's a very lengthy paper, it's over 10,000 words.
Wow.
What is necessary to make the full point of, you know, the naysayers,
Yeah.
their point, where's the evidence? So we'll have to say to them, well, you don't know what you're looking at because you're using the wrong tool.
Mm,
And so before I can tell them what the right tool is, I have to tell them why the tools they're using are wrong. And so that's what this paper is.
okay. And what on your kind of journey of writing this particular paper, can we gain any insights about what were the wrong tools?
Well, I mean, if you want to read that many words or whatever, but when you think about all of those people that go and get assessed for autism, and the system comes back and says, no, you're not autistic because X, Y, and Z.
Mm,
And they're using an instrument that is not designed for the people that are sitting in front of these professionals. Who is it designed for?
mm,
Right? What is its purpose? What was it originally created to accomplish? And so when you start asking those questions, people become uncomfortable, right? I think I've mentioned before how many girls I've met in high school who are clearly autistic.
mm,
And yet, when they go to the clinic and say, we would really benefit from having these accommodations and stuff, we just need the diagnosis, we need the acknowledgement.
mm,
And they say things like, well, you chat to your friend and you have a boyfriend. So, no,
yeah.
you're not autistic. These types of
Mm,
things. What does it mean in terms of the instrument, that's what I'm looking at. And so the benefit is almost the ability to have a rebuttal. The parents would have the ability to say, well, your tool uses this methodology, however, it's culturally biased, right?
Yeah.
Especially Latin American children. Females are socialized to be incredibly friendly and chatty and helpful and all these
Mm.
kinds of things. And then when they go for assessment, that's weaponized against them. Well, I'm sorry, you're not, lining up your little toys. You're helping your mom
Yeah.
and you're chatting to your cousin. So therefore you cannot
Oh,
be,
and you make
right? So
eye
there are these,
contact.
yes, yes. But if your culture socializes you into that, it does not remove your autism. It just means that you're enculturated. And so
Mm.
can we take these anthropological concepts of enculturation and cultural fit and stuff and use them to inform the creation of a tool, right? So that would be kind of the next step. Like how do we remove the cultural bias, the white boy bias of the testing?
Yeah. And in fact, I was reading something just today. It was a post on social media about girls and being diagnosed and how they're exactly what you've just said, the social aspect, and yet if you dig a bit deeper, you notice that they have a whole range of sensory preferences, auditory, kind of being overwhelmed by being in noises, being described as being having anxiety, when actually that anxiety is there because they're having to manage environments that aren't adapted, that don't have support for them, that they're not being diagnosed, they're going under the radar because they don't, like you say, they don't fit the criteria that is, I guess, like we say, outdated, doesn't meet, it isn't fit for purpose for all of our autistic
Right.
community.
And you can take all of these adults, adult females that are getting diagnosed in, their 30s,
Mm.
40s, 50s, whatever. And essentially what they say, if you listen to them closely, it's like, I went to the doctor because I was needing this kind of help. And they said, well, no, you might be a bit depressed. You might be a bit anxious. Here's a pill.
Mm.
Here's a pill for that. And then it doesn't work because that's not what it's for. And then they say, oh, okay, you have, this other thing, or you have borderline personality, or you
Yeah.
have, and so they're being kind of medically gaslit this whole time. And it takes them 15, 20 years to work through it. A person might go in and say to their practitioner, I think I'm autistic. And what do you think? And they'll say, well, tell me about this. Why do you think that way? Well, ahead of meetings where it's kind of new and novel, I'm scripting in my head. And they say, well, you own a business. You run a business. You're very successful. You're a certified professional. Why do you think you're autistic? Like the two are mutually exclusive.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
well, Jamie, you have PhD. So what? Autistic people can have PhD. You
Mm.
know, I made mention of the video I released this morning about this conversation, you and I. It's pretty much the only spontaneous conversation I have in public. Right. Everything else I do, the other videos I make and stuff, they're scripted,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a while to create that script. But if you tell a practitioner you have spontaneous conversation with a friend, oh, forget it, Jamie, you're not autistic.
Mm. Interesting. And it's and I acknowledge how privileged I am to have this time with you, because I often think it must be quite daunting coming on here every week and thinking, oh, what's she going to say?
Well, and I've said this to you before, but I say it again. That very first meeting was crucial, right? Because you were so careful and so caring about managing my kind of anxiety and my language issues, difficulties, that it made the second one easier for me to say yes to. Right. But I've been to others where it was just a mess, and they come back and it's like, oh, the audience loved you. I don't care. I'm sorry. I'm not doing it. That's just not happening.
Not putting
You
myself
know,
through that again.
and that makes me look, aloof or whatever, but I have to protect my space. But yeah, so the paper kind of because in academia you can never do everything at once. And so this one, builds from the last. It says, essentially what are in these instruments and are they fit for purpose? All right.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very good question. And it's something the courts in America and the UK have been wrestling with for generations in terms of like forensic science.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have this measure, but is it accurate? Is it valid? Is it doing the thing that it's supposed to do? Because somebody's liberty is online, we take it seriously. But on the other end of it, because it's just an autism diagnosis, we don't really care if the instrument fits or not. As it is, there are all these kiddos now that are autistic, and we can afford to support them. So why would we want to improve upon that?
Yeah. And I guess sort of circling back, thinking about Gestalt language processes and thinking about the evidence or what people are looking for. Because, as you say, those that feel there is a lack of evidence are maybe looking in the wrong places. They're not looking for where the evidence is. So I'm really keen to explore that, if that's okay.
Well, it's like me sitting here, late morning, California, saying, I see no evidence that there's a lunar body up in the sky. There's no moon. I don't see it. Right? Like, that sounds silly, but it's the same kind of reasoning. I don't acknowledge it. And I'm not willing to listen to anybody who has any kind of difference of opinion. So I can write pieces that talk about the DSM and the diagnostic criteria for autism and saying, this is everything that we need to demonstrate and prove Gestalt language processing, right? Everything's there. And you can take the work of Anne Peters and Berry Prezant and Marge Blanc, and you can take all of the language that they provided for us in their research and books and so on. And then you can take the DSM and say, see, there it is. And they'll say things, the naysayers will say whatever, nay, right? That's it. No arguments, no rebuttal, just you're wrong, bugger off. That's it.
And I guess as well, the fact that even we are having this conversation now has come out of, as a speech and language therapist, my passion and awareness of the children and young people that I'm supporting, presenting as, I mean, I don't know what's going on in their brain, so I can only ever say that I hypothesize that they are Gestalt language processors. But I mean, pretty much watertight, looking at their profile and how they acquire language and how, I've learned so much from you, not just about language, and I'm going to talk about this in a post this week, but also thinking in wholes, how that arrives, how that is for that child. And I've had some really, really positive experiences and outcomes lately with teaching staff, literally through these conversations, explaining to teachers about how things might arrive for this little 7-year-old GLP, that whilst his language has made great progress and he's at stage 6, but when we're thinking about how he's processing information, is thinking not just about the whole in terms of whether that be maths, for example, or literacy, but also the whole environment, how he, the ecology of the classroom as well. And that's definitely, and it's not just this one child. And this is where, thinking about evidence, we have got the evidence from Anne Peters, from her research, from Dr. Barry Prezant, from Marge Blanc, from her longitudinal study of 85 different children. But we've also got thousands of therapists across, literally from India to Australia to New Zealand to America, Europe, who are noticing the same things, the same patterns. So Where is the evidence? Well, hey, here it is. Here's
Right.
my case
And
notes.
exactly. And there's far more evidence than that.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you look at, my school district, my state, my country, our literacy in America is crap. And it's frozen. It does not get better no matter how much money they throw at it. And the conversations that we have in school about, these problems. And I have data, I have longitudinal data. And when I try to present that, I'm not taken seriously,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it is stable data. The pattern emerges over and over and over again. You have, I think in your practice, parents privileged enough to be able to identify something and have the means to support
Mm-hmm.
it. And a country
Yeah.
that has National Health Service and these types of things that we don't have here in America. And so the families that I'm supporting, they've not had any of these interventions at all. But the pattern is very clear.
Mm-hmm.
You have somebody who is otherwise intelligent, probably autistic, probably Gestalt processor, goes all the way through primary school, and they end up getting stuck somewhere between year 2 and year 4 in terms of literacy and letter knowledge and all that stuff because they have sight word memory, right? They've
Yeah.
memorized things. They're not very complex. And they get into middle school and they start to fall behind. And the standardized data shows that they've kind of plateaued around year 4. And
Mm-hmm.
then I meet them in high school and they're still stuck in year 4. And yet we're trying to hang this academic language at grade
Mm.
level and it's not sticking, right? And so the standardized data stuck year 4, sometimes year 5, depending, but the data is there. And then I want to know what I'm looking at. And so, the formalized testing structures, you cannot do that without parent information. But what I can do, I do a basic reading inventory,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a standardized measure, the basic reading inventory. And it's just word lists that are, kind of normed and grade leveled and stuff. And I've watched kids have a meltdown because they're so used to having these same kinds of words, but these words they've never seen before, right? These are out of their sight words repository. And so they don't know what to do with it. And I tried to tell them, look, just, if you don't know, just say, don't know, don't panic, don't worry about it. And what it shows me is that they're not doing phonics
Mm.
at all, right? The state of California and my school district throws massive amounts of money towards phonics,
Mm.
right? And my district, they throw a bunch of money around one specific vendor, which I've written about on Substack. But everybody has to go to their trainings, everybody, and they're not trainings, they're marketing, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But we all know, like, I'm a credentialed teacher, I'm certified in literacy and reading instruction, all this kind of stuff. So I know how to teach reading, right?
Mm.
I wrote a book about language instruction and a follow-up about how to do it in non-English populations. But that's not the point. It's not credentialism. It is I can sit down across from a student and I can feel them start to melt down when they've come across a task. It's like catching them out. I know the basic CVC words. I know the basic, you know, vowel, consonant, E, that kind of stuff, and they can kind of
Mm.
tease that out. But when it gets into, words in the English language that are about year 6 or 7 that come into English from the Normans, from the French, that have
Mm.
those kinds of French orthographies, milieu, you know, a middle
Mm-hmm.
schooler is expected to know that word, but they have no idea because they're not used to that. They kind of sound it out and they don't have any phonics ability. And then they feel a bit embarrassed, maybe like, oh my gosh, what's going
Mm-hmm.
on here? And you can watch it in real time. And it's reliable, it's repeatable, it's reproducible. It is kind of, one of those data points that says, this person is not performing in this way, right? Somebody who is trained in phonics, who can decode in that way, will not react that way. They will see the letters because they're English letters, and they'll make that sound, and then they'll make the sound and that kind of stuff, and they won't know what to do with the ending of it because they don't know French, right?
Mm.
So they won't know how to get from, the word milieu to how to say it. Or macaque, or, those types of things that are kind of specialized science words or whatever. But I'm not concerned that they can or cannot do it. I want to see how they react to it. I want to see how it makes them feel about it. And
Mm-hmm.
then I want to talk to them afterwards. This to me is the important part, right?
Yeah.
Not just, can you define it for me, right? I've yet to find a colleague that can define milieu for me, right? Everybody knows how to use it in a sentence. Nobody knows what it means, right? Nobody can define it. But I'm more interested in what happens when that word is presented in writing in front of you and how you say it, right? These are basic, well, that's basic reading inventory, but basic instruments, just a reading list, a word list, right? Or a story written at like year 2 that you've never seen before and you have no decoding skills. What do you do with it? It's like 2 paragraphs. How do you respond to it? How do you feel? How do you present emotionally? That's what I'm concerned with.
Yeah. I think that's when we think that our classrooms are set up for one type of, even if one type of learner, one type of of cognitive processing, even with the supports for executive functioning, for memory, etc., it still doesn't align with a different style of processing. And and that it's not just in the States, certainly in the UK. When we're thinking, when I was like reading your article this morning, I was just thinking exactly the same. I remember how when students of mine were brilliant at maths, I mean, like unbelievable, but they were getting the worst scores because they didn't show their workings. They didn't show them in the same way that was being taught to them, because they just saw it, they just got it and didn't need to do that. And so when I was reading that article today, I was just thinking, gosh, this was, Fred that I worked with back in, 2006, or, so-and-so back in 2012. And I just, I hadn't really even joined all those dots up until I was reading it today. And I was just thinking, this is it. This is, what it's about. And then what that did to them. As well, as people, and moving on, and who knows, now what's happened to them in terms of their education. Hope that they met somebody, a teacher like yourself, that sort of got that.
I think it's important to realize that a few generations ago, we put somebody on a moon, right, with slide rules. And the mathematics of that time wasn't any more complicated or better or worse. The curriculum that they learned from wasn't any better or worse, but they didn't have computers, right? And so they have a way of kind of relationally thinking about things, British, Soviet, American, whatever, that you had to be able to relate to people to work on these teams. They put Sputnik in the air, they put people on the moon, satellites in orbit and stuff. And so when I'm explaining to students, I'm giving them the whole of it, right? This all started with John Napier, and how do we do these different functions, right? He wanted to know things about, how do I calculate how far this cannonball is going to go? And how do I do this kind of ship navigation and stuff? And they talked about it. And they kind of bounce stories off one another, and then from that standpoint they reason things out, and then you end up with log tables. And ran an experiment in Algebra 2 last year about I'm gonna the notice and wonder protocol. I'm going to put a log table in front of you. What do you notice? What do you not wonder? And they had no idea what it was, right? And then the next day I teach them logarithms, and we talk about orders of magnitude and pH scales and earthquakes and stuff like that they know about. And then they know how to read the log table after that, and then we can talk about how it's, logs and exponents go back and forth and stuff. We can tell stories about it. The curriculum, the standard curriculum, the unit circle, which is one of my pet peeves, we have them learn all of these coordinate points, the square root of 3/2 divided by, all this kind. No, picture a clock, right? We're going anti-clockwise with this, right? So when I go to 3 to high 12, How many turns of the clock have I gone? Well, a quarter. Yeah, so it's a quarter turn, right? Which is a phrase that keeps coming up in my ratings, the quarter turn. But even, what that stands for, the square root of -1, that was laughed at the time. And that's why, that whole imaginary number thing, because they thought it was silly. And now modern life runs on it, that quarter turn. And even when I try to build in things, exercises, the number
Mm,
line, add to, subtract to, divide to, multiply to, you're moving in that straight line.
mm,
Well, how do you get over there? Right? A number line is that, from point to point. It
mm.
isn't it, it does not, it deals in x-axis. It doesn't deal in y. So how do we add y into that? Well, we need that quarter turn. Well, the square root of -1 gives us that, right? And then how do we extend into 3 dimensions? How do we add z? And so I try to give them the whole of it, and then they get it, right? And part of it is because I had to figure out how to explain this to a jury, in Los Angeles and, around America. But, some of the stuff that I was doing, computing the height of an unknown subject inside of a two-dimensional depiction of a three-dimensional reality, I had to explain it in fourth grade terms. Right? So for me, it was kind of natural. This is the whole of it. This is how we tell, how tall the person is as they come through the door, because we use all of these reference points and we can do this mathematically. But I'm doing it with story, right? And I'm getting them to the maths through the story, right? And I think that's something we Gestalt processors are very good at
Mm.
when we are supported. When we have the ability to tell stories to each other, I think we learn and we grow from each other.
Definitely, definitely. So when can we expect to see this published paper?
Well, I think if their past performance is a predictor of future behavior, within a couple of months, I would imagine. They seem to be very quick. So
That's
I'm
really
happy about
exciting.
that. And there was a bit of pushback on the last paper. Um, there are naysayers everywhere, right? But just like the last paper, this university and their publication does not charge people to access it, and they do not charge academics to publish, right? So it's basically subsidized by the state. But it's there are predatory paper mills out there that charge authors $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever to publish something,
Mm,
or they put things behind paywalls. This journal does neither of them, so I'm happy to give them to them.
mm.
Another kind of naysayer argument is that they're hoovering up all of this research and they're building DeepSeek and their AI with it. And I say, fine, they can have it. Hopefully, their AI will be more informed than the AI here in America that continues to push the naysayers at us anytime we
Yeah,
ask a question about autism or something.
yeah,
So yeah, we have to acknowledge, that the naysayers exist and kind of push back at what they're saying nay about.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Well, it has been a lovely morning. Thank you so much. I will look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, hopefully it's a bit cooler for you. So,
Hello, let's please. Thank you.
yes.
See you next week.
All right. Bye-bye. Cheers.